Okay. Well, in the interest of time, I think we'll just go ahead and jump right in. So we have Kim and Gordon presenting what they presented in the Oxford conference a little while ago. So happy solstice, and let's get through these, and then we can have time to talk afterwards. Does that sound good?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I've been working on the Houston solar marker matrix for, probably 10, 12 years. And it's interesting that I was recently reading a paper by Dr. Krupp from the Earth and Science. I don't know if you probably can't see my video, but it's the Earth and Sky Northridge Conference on Archaeoastronomy, where he makes a statement that there should be some way to qualify these solar markers. And I guess nothing has ever been done. So I studied a site out in West Texas that is the largest pictograph site in Texas, with over 1,500 pictographs along about a kilometer long cliff. And part of my research was, well, how do I verify the claims of solar markers out there, or how do I identify new solar markers? Hence the solar marker matrix came to mind, and I've continuously updated it and added things to it. But first, let's talk about what a solar marker is. The rock art community, as such, does not have a definition of a solar marker in their listing of all the different terms for rock art. They don't have a definition. So here's a definition that I propose, which is solar marker is an intentional rock art glyph or panel which records a significant component of the astronomical knowledge of a culture, preserving the interactions of light and shadow on the rock art at specific solar points. Now, I believe that solar markers are one of the most objective interpretations of rock art. Unless you have an indigenous person who can clearly identify the meaning of rock art, a solar marker certainly records that astronomical knowledge, and we can see the celestial sphere basically the same as ancient cultures did. Precession doesn't really affect the travel of the sun along the horizon. So as a result, the operation of a solar marker interactions operate the same today as when originally created. The solar marker is an intentional rock art glyph or panel which records a significant component of the astronomical knowledge of a culture, preserving the interactions of light and shadows on the rock art at specific solar points. We can see the celestial sphere the same as ancient cultures. Precession does not affect the travel of the sun along the horizon. As a result, the operation of solar marker interactions operate the same today as when originally created. And they record the astronomical knowledge. The record of astronomical knowledge is usually the most closely guarded information, which the solar marker opens that knowledge to us today. All right, so the challenges are that people feel that this interaction is just coincidental. And many times the culture who scribed the rock art is unknown. There's no ethnographic support and therefore no support for their purpose. And rock art is difficult to date, and no evidence to support a culture's ability to accurately determine significant dates. And that last one is important. That I feel that a horizon study should be done for a horizon calendar to determine if they had the ability to pinpoint these specific dates so that they could accurately scribe the interaction. So statistically, Johnson in 1992 stated he had documented more than 300 panels in Northeast Utah. Fountain, 2005, which is Oxford XII, which was published in 2005, but that was actually the 1995 Santa Fe Oxford conference. But he found the database 45 different sites with 219 observations. And he shows 34% solstice, 32% equinox, 14% winter solstice, Summer and autumn cross-quarter days, 11%, and winter and spring cross-quarter days, 9%. Now, I think this is significant. These statistics are significant in that I know that there's a general feeling about whether equinoxes were even recorded and what their purpose was, and or for cross-quarter days. But as you can see, that these are statistically significant numbers. So let's go to the next set. Preston in 83, from 93 solar interactions, they recorded 39% summer solstice, 35% winter solstice, 15% equinox, and 11% 45 days before/after winter solstice, which is essentially is the winter or spring cross-quarter days. So again, these amounts are statistically significant, so you can't necessarily count them out as not being important to a culture when there's that high percentage of equinoxes and cross-quarter days recorded. And of course, at Paint Rock, there was a significant amount of cross-quarter days as well as multiple equinox days recorded in the rock art. So the types of solar markers are pointers. You have a moving sun or shadow line. You have geometric alignments and miscellaneous. So it could be of a different design. The one thing I haven't done, Johnson, he was a member of the Utah Rock Art Association, and he came up with a whole of approximately 15 different shadow and sun designs that he named, which may be useful in incorporating in the future for people to be able to talk the same terminology just based on the shape of the interaction. All right, so let's see here. All right. So the matrix is a tool for researchers to help identify new solar markers, confirm existing solar markers, rule coincidental interactions and false positives, and lead to a worldwide database of solar markers. You know, hopefully people, and I'm always looking for input to make changes as necessary to try to constrain the matrix to allow for better identification and or ruling out false interactions or false positives. Okay, so where am I here? Okay. So here's the solar marker matrix, and there's 4 areas that I determined. The first area is the solar points, winter and summer solstice, gets 5 points. Everything is point related. In some cases, these can be shifted up or down depending on the particular site and the particular information you might have. Typically, in a lot of cultures, the winter and summer solstices are the most important. But if there was confirmed ethnographic information to indicate that a different time, a cross-quarter day, for instance, was more important, then it could be moved up the point scale. So you got equinox, cross-quarter days, confirmed anticipatory points, and random days scored. And then on the time of day, I have solar noon as a 5-point thing. And the reason I have that as a 5-point is that I feel that that's an additional intentional step by culture, as they had to, be astute sun watchers and be aware to determine solar noon at their particular location. Although, again, I've had some feedback on that. I think Steve McCluskey wrote a paper that said there's no solar markers that occur at noon. So, but he was mainly writing that paper in regards to the Fajada Butte 3 slab site. Sunrise appears to be sun watching in a lot of cultures, but some cultures watch the sunrise for a half a year and they watch the sunset for a half a year. So those could be flipped there. So nothing is cast in stone on this. This is a guide, and then random morning and random afternoon gets 2 points and 1 point. And the third area is interactive character. Highest point total would be confirmed multi-solar point marker, where there's multiple interactions on the same glyph. Number 4 is a focal point, which is generally the central portion of the glyph, but a focal point could be something significant. And so that's going to be somewhat subjective as to exactly what that focal point is. Geometric alignments are where there's a crooked sun line or a crooked shadow line, which mimics almost exactly the shape of the glyph. Then register marks, and I'll show you an item of that, which is a mark or some type of scribe on the rock art that gives them something like an anticipatory point. And then tangent alignments, and then random. And then finally, the supporting evidence. Number 5 is horizon astronomy. And again, as I said before, I think that horizon astronomy investigation should be done at all these rock art sites to determine that they actually had the ability in some way to record the solstices, the equinoxes, and so on. And then temporal sensitivity and precision. Generally, the interactions are pretty quick. And so the precision of the glyph is important in how it occurs. And I've got some qualifying restrictions that will kind of address that. And then the last 3 there are typically different archaeological ways of interpreting rock art, which is informed sources, a formal examination, or analogy symbolism. So once you add all these totals up, if you see at the bottom there, if you have a 18 to 20 plus, and I should say that on the 4th supporting evidence, you can actually score more than one area there. So if you have a glyph that scores 18 to 20 plus points, you have a high probability of a solar marker. If it scores 14 to 18, you probably have a solar marker. 8 to 13 becomes very questionable, and of course 4 to 8 is no chance. Okay, so let's see. So the qualifying restrictions, which I've added, which I didn't have originally with the matrix, are the solar interaction must touch and interact with the glyph. And that came about as I have had seen claims of solar markers where the sun interaction didn't actually touch the glyph. So the sun or shadow line must interact with the glyph. The culmination of the interaction must be unique, both in the design of the sun or shadow shape, and must interact with the focal point or tangent of the glyph or some very unique part of the glyph. The interaction sequence must be brief, typically less than 30 minutes. And that's been pretty consistent for all the different literature that I've read on various claims of solar markers. They're typically even under 20 minutes. The interaction begins, occurs at the focal point or culminates on the focal point, and then it moves on. If the sun or shadow line stays on there for hours, then it becomes very problematic as to whether it was intentional. But if it's brief and quick, then it certainly speaks to the accuracy and the temporal sensitivity of that glyph. And finally, the solar interaction must interact with one glyph at a time. And that's obviously for every rule, there's sometimes there's exceptions, and that's why I have the asterisks down there. Okay. So at this point, I was going to just go deeper into each of the sections. This winter solstice, the equinox, the cross quarter days, and the confirmed anticipatory points. And an anticipatory point is similar to a horizon astronomy evaluation, where a lot of times there's some point on the horizon used as an anticipatory point to let the sun watcher know that there's maybe 2 weeks in advance of the winter solstice to prepare for ritual. So let's see. This is the winter solstice marker at Paint Rock in Texas. And apparently there's a number of paint rock art sites named Paint Rock in California and other I think I was watching the San Diego rock art presentation last weekend, and I think there's a Paint Rock in North Carolina. So anyway, this sequence is just over 20 minutes. The solar noon is at 12:38 Central Time, based on the U.S. Naval Observatory. To right is 12:27:40. It touches the inner glyph at 12:38:04. The pointer hits the central or focal point of that glyph, which is actually at solar noon. I mean, it's really accurate. And then at 12:48, it's moved off to the right. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so this is section 3, interactive characteristics. Again, confirm multi-solar points, focal points, which I just showed you on that winter solstice marker, geometric alignments, register marks, tangent alignments, and random. Tangent is when there's a shaft of light that touches either side of a round, typically a round glyph of some type. Now, this is a picture from Ken Zoll in Arizona. This is the vernal equinox, and it splits this sun emblem right in the middle. But 30 days afterwards, you see how this crooked line matches right up. You can see there's a register mark right here, scribed in here on this glyph. And Ken, use the term register mark, hence why I'm using it, because that alignment occurs 30 days after the vernal equinox, which is an extremely important date for the agave harvest for the culture there in Arizona. So these marks are hence the register marks, and I think as these things are studied more, we'll find additional evidence of use of the glyph to help the culture anticipate rituals.
Yeah, obviously.
Do what? Here's a tangent alignment on a round circular shield emblem. It frames it on the winter solstice, but also on the cross quarter days. A shaft of light splits that round emblem at solar noon. And the original claim at this site was this shaft of light on the tangent on the winter solstice. But I recorded this splitting of the shield at solar noon on the vernal and summer cross quarter days. And that may be a more accurate indication. One or the other potentially is just coincidental because of the round shaft nature. So where am I at here? And then finally, section 4 again is supporting evidence. As I stated, I think a horizon astronomy should be evaluated at every site. Temporal sensitivity and precision of the glyph is very important. And then, of course, the 3 methods. Because the one thing that I know that David Whitley wrote a book on rock art research, and he kind of really downplayed archaeoastronomy and solar markers, because he said that it's very simple. You run out there on the winter solstice, you record an interaction, and that's all you have to do. Whereas the archaeologists have to go out on a field for in the summer for 6 or 8 weeks and do their dig, and so it's a lot more intensive. But he failed to realize that really to properly do and evaluate a rock art site, you need to go there a minimum of once a month for 12 months, and if not more. I went once a month for the first year, and then I went just on the main solar points the second year. And I still need to, in the future, go back and get some additional photograph documentation of these glyphs. So again, I got ahead of myself, but that's what I'm talking about there, that it really, most people don't, unless you are real close to a rock art site. And this particular site from my house is like 350 miles. It's about a 6.5 hour drive. So I just can't run out there one day and take a few photographs and run home. So, but some people, if you live close to a rock art site where it's an hour or two drive, it would be possible to run out as necessary. So, but it's important to do that horizon survey so that, again, a culture, you can determine that they had the ability to record the interaction, because it's kind of the chicken and the egg thing. Which came first, the glyph or did they observe the interaction on the panel and then realize that, well, this is occurring on a particular significant winter solstice or summer solstice, and then they scribe the rock art, which is what I believe actually occurs, because these things, are so many of them and they're so accurate that the culture, the sun watchers, had to see the particular sun or shadow interaction that was possible, and then scribe the glyph to interact with it. This was my challenge at Paint Rock, because here's the horizon, and as you can see, there's no topography to record the sun's movement. But as it turned out, the cliff itself meets the horizon. I don't know, can y'all see my cursor?
I don't see it.
Okay. Well, you see where the horizon meets the cliff there. That really became the point, because that notch allowed them to record the movement of the sun. And my theodolite is set up in this particular area, which I call the point of observation, because in this particular area there are hash marks, 47 hash marks in multiple counts, where they were counting days to the solstices from cross quarter days and back and forth. So here's my sun sights and calibration of the cliff right there. So that's just a standard evaluation. Here's a field ground truth, field truthing. This particular notch on the winter cross quarter day and the fall cross quarter day, the sun rises right there in the notch on November 6th. And I think this particular picture I took on February 3rd, and the sun comes right out of the notch. Okay. Well, anyway, the last slide that I really want you to see is a cross quarter interaction that is on May and August, with a light wedge that hits the center of the focal point of a sun emblem, and then runs off on those dates. And there's an extra picture that I took on April 19th, which shows this the point of this sun wedge to the complete left of the solar marker, and that's it. So that's
Okay.
it. I'm good.
Has anybody
Let's see here.
taken this matrix and applied it? that you
Yes,
know of?
I have.
Awesome. So I think this is really what we need to do is, start standardizing, and that we can start using the same language. So this is really nice.
Right. Yeah. That's the intent of it, is that hopefully, it gets out there. And I've given this presentation this past year to the Society of American Archaeology, and I gave it last, I guess, December to the San Diego Rock Art Research annual meeting. So I'm trying to put it out there as much as possible, and I'm always looking for feedback. And of course, I gave it at the Oxford conference, and I need as much feedback, because I know Ivy's in here, and she has a really interesting paper she's working on that appears to record the equal distance of the altitude of the sun and the equal distance along the horizon. So that's something that obviously I'm going to have to add into the matrix, and she can tell you more about it at some future time. So
I would.
All right. Anyways, thanks, and sorry for the.
No problem. Well, I would definitely encourage anybody doing this type of work to think about using that. That's really helps us all.
So I thought I'd mostly talk about some theoretical ideas and open this up for a dialogue with all you guys in terms of your own reactions to this. But first, I'd like to comment on a few things that Gordon talked about, which was a very nice idea. But first off, and I think many of us would share this feeling, was that rock art can also be a backsite for a horizon event. I think we see this in Chaco, and the horizon event may be just as important or more important than the rock art, in terms of if you stand at a particular place and look out at the horizon to the rising sun or the setting sun, you have the possibility of actually seeing and participating in a hierophany. And I guess you all know what hierophanies are, namely they're the sort of breakthrough of the sacred into the mundane world. And sometimes they're very dramatic and very moving. And I think Chaco in particular is a warehouse of hierophanies. There are hierophanies it seems like everywhere throughout the Chaco area, and indeed the Southwest. So I think hierophanies are a very important feature of our experience in exploring archaeoastronomy and cultural astronomy. That's sort of related to this issue of horizon calendars. The horizon calendar may be I suspect in many cases a modern imposition of our own ideas upon the ancient world. For the Native Americans in the American Southwest, the land was sacred, of course, and irregularities or special features on the horizon were markers of something very special and sacred. And likewise, the sun and the moon were sacred. So the appearance of the sun at horizon, at the sunset or sunrise, could have been the appearance of a sacred being on a sacred feature of the landscape, and therefore itself a very powerful experience that may or may not have been related to people's interested in keeping a calendar. The calendar, I disagree with some people about this, but a horizon calendar may not be at all useful for agriculture, for example. It's certainly useful for establishing the date of a celebration at the solstices, but for the Southwest, where weather is so irregular. Rainfall, the rainy season comes at very irregular periods of time. And my own experience of living in the Great Sage Plain, namely Cortez, was that those farmers who were raising pinto beans were less successful if they were using a calendar, namely a particular date of the year. And those that paid attention to the varying onset of seasons by looking at flowering plants, insects, moisture of the soil, were much more successful than those who used a arbitrary calendar. So that I think the idea of a horizon calendar is again more of a Western imposition upon a very, very, very powerful belief amongst the ancestral pueblos of the sacredness of the land and the sky. And Gordon talked about anticipation points. I don't mean to criticize you, Gordon, but we started out many years ago with Mike Zeilik talking about anticipation is all. And 2 weeks would give people time to prepare costumes and prepare a food for a celebration and for people to gather. But 2 weeks is also half of a synodic period of the moon. And 2 weeks means if you observe something 2 weeks before, if you identify a time 2 weeks before solstice, that means that for the next month, the next full moon will be the full moon closest to solstice. And in particular, we know from ethnography of the Zuni, it was the Zuni, as you probably know, were interested in balancing the weak moon and the strong sun, and the strong moon and the weak sun. And for them at winter solstice, it was a weak sun and a strong moon. And the time for a celebration was the time of the full moon closest to solstice. And likewise with with summer solstice for the Zunis, the weak sun was the important time when there was a weak moon was the time when we had a summer solstice at the strong sun at summer solstice. And for them, therefore, it was a new moon, or the first visible crescent of the new moon was the time for the celebration. So that the important event for them was not 2 weeks before solstice to prepare, but it was to identify either the new moon or the full moon closest to solstice. So I think the idea of anticipation, again, may be a Western imposition upon a sacred tradition. But let me get on to, I'm running out of time. But let me get on to the abstract that I think many of you have had a chance to read. And there were three topics that I identified as a hypothesis that I wanted to discuss. And one was that Chaco Canyon itself, and I'd be really interested in GB's reaction to this in particular, was probably a what we would call a empty ceremonial center. It was evidence for large numbers of people living in the great houses is very slight. Bonito perhaps said a third of the rooms had hearths in them and were occupied as living structures. And the population over the years has dropped from perhaps 3,000 way down to perhaps under 1,000, because with a closer interpretation of the great houses. So the possibility is that Chaco Canyon during the Bonito period when the great houses were being built from 1020 to 1100, may have been occupied primarily by ritual specialists, by elites living in the great houses, but a relatively small number of people. The major events, namely celebrations, probably occurring, dare I say, at December solstice, or around December solstice, were the times when the majority of the people came into the valley. We know there's evidence that the great houses were built, probably with the assistance of pilgrims and visitors, so that the major feature of the major calendar and the major feature in Chaco Canyon were winter solstice celebrations, were large numbers of people coming in, and some very, very special events taking place. That also meant there was trade. Every pilgrimage, most pilgrimage events that we know of around the world were major trade festivals. Traders chose times when there'd be people around that they could sell something to or buy something from, and it would be a festival, a pilgrimage festival that was probably those times, and therefore one had both trade and pilgrimage festivals occurring in Chaco, organized by the residents of the great houses, but a small number. The sort of the nail in the coffin of large numbers of people who actually occupied Chaco Canyon year-round was by a very powerful, interesting paper by Larry Benson, who had analyzed in great detail the food production, the food productivity of Chaco, and concluded that perhaps maybe 700 people could live there year-round based upon maize, corn, and beans that could be grown locally. But once you talked about 2,000 people living in the canyon, then there needed to be large numbers of porter loads coming in. And for 2,000 people, he even estimates there were maybe 15 porter loads per day needed to come into the canyon to provide food for that large a residence. That produces a very vulnerable society. If there are ideas that Chaco was a culture that had acquired hegemony over a large number of people due to force and threat of cannibalism, for one thing, and to have a culture relying upon 15 porters coming in per day that could easily be stopped by siege tactics doesn't make sense at all. So the evidence really does suggest that there was a small number of year-round population in Chaco, namely a so-called empty ceremonial center. Related to that, and there's number two of the hypotheses I wanted to present, was that these great houses may themselves have been alive and have been as valuable as the ceremonies themselves. And it may be that both the land and the sky and these great houses were seen as living beings that needed to be treated very carefully, and were themselves involved in a reciprocal relationship with the people. I mean, we do have evidence from the Native Americans that they saw the houses living a same kind of life cycle as plants and people. Namely, they grow, they reach a climax of importance and value and power, and then they decline. So the idea that I suggest in the title in terms of ontology is that both the land and the houses were viewed as sacred and needed to be cared for, needed to be fed, needed to be protected. One example of a great house or a large structure that needed to be protected is the Sun Temple in Mesa Verde. It is the largest exclusively ceremonial structure in the South amongst the ancestral pueblos that I know of. And it was perhaps built in the late 1100s, about the time that people moved off the top of the plateau, top of the mesa into these cave enclosures. But then as it got to be too dangerous, for people to live on the mesa, also got to be too dangerous to leave the Sun Temple unprotected. And so there was a large wall that was built around it, maybe 14, 15 feet high, that would protect the structure itself, which was again uninhabited, perhaps like the other great houses. The great house at Chimney Rock, one of my favorite places, as you know, was probably unoccupied most of the year. It was not a good place to live year round, and itself may have been sacred. And the third point I wanted to talk about was Fajada Butte itself. When we talk of Fajada Butte, often we think of the sun dagger, but Fajada Butte, I think, became the primary solar shrine of Chaco Canyon. Again, I'd like your people's reaction to that. Of all the solar events and all the solar hierophanies that occurred in Chaco for a period from 950 to 1300, it is Fajada Butte itself that stands out. Namely, as you probably know, there is an unexcavated Great Kiva in Marsh's Rincon near Fajada Butte. And if you stand in the center of that Great Kiva, you see the sun at December solstice rise right over the top of Fajada, which really qualifies very nicely as a hierophany. In addition to that, at the same period of time, based upon ceramics, a series of scaffolding and ladders and rock steps were cut in the southwestern side of Fajada to lead people up to the top. And there are two hearths, one at the bottom and one at the top of that stairway, which could have been used for ceremonial fires around winter solstice. And we have an extensive measurement of the ceramics of Fajada, which indicate that people were visiting it during the period from some identified by red mesa black and white ceramics, maybe 950, through the end of the 1200s, with an extensive appearance of Mesa Verde black on white. The interesting thing about that is that after the conclusion of the Great House culture, 1130 or 1140, the evidence of Mesa Verde black and white on the top of Fajada indicates that it was still used as a major ceremonial site, a major ritual experience to climb to the top. So that it appears that during these 4 centuries, from 900 to the end of the 1200s, people were visiting the top of Fajada Butte, and also probably some of them observing December solstice rise over the top of the butte. And it's possible that the entire area of the Southwest was influenced by that kind of ritual of people visiting Fajada and watching the sun come up at winter solstice. I'm thinking in particular of the rather remote area of the Southwest, namely Cedar Mesa, and Grand Gulch. Grand Gulch, if some of you have visited, has a lovely site called the Perfect Kiva. And the Perfect Kiva has a series of whole series of oriented grinding slicks that are pointed towards December solstice sunrise. These grinding slicks are similar to the grinding slicks that one finds in Chaco at the campground, where it looks as though these were not used for grinding food, but for making noise, for making grinding music, and could have been used for grinding the sun up above the horizon at the time of solstice. So it's interesting to speculate that the people who were in Grand Gulch, and this is all Pueblo III population, this is the 1200s, who were observing winter solstice sunrise in Grand Gulch, were cognizant of the same kind of ritual that was taking place in Chaco Canyon at winter solstice as the sun came up over Bajada Butte. So there is a nice sense of bundling of ceremony and ritual and sacredness in connecting Grand Gulch off to the north, off to the west of Mesa Verde, and Chaco itself. And there's sort of two major themes that seem to be coming from the archaeological community about our understanding of cultural astronomy and archaeology itself. And one of that is sort of championed by Tim Pakitut, and that is bundling, namely sites and events and people are bundled both in space and time. And this would be an example of the bundling in space and in time of this ritual of December solstice sunrise. And the other theme that one sees amongst archaeologists today, like Ruth Van Dyke, for example, is that of ontologies. That what we see from our Western perspective in terms of rocks and a canyon is quite different from what indigenous people, namely the Native Americans, saw back as ancestral pueblos. Namely, they were surrounded by a sacred land. They saw sacred beings in the skies. They were living or associated with sacred sculptures, sacred structures, and an entirely different fundamental understanding of reality, which is what we would identify as ontology, a completely different ontology than what we have today. So I see it's 7:03. That's about time for. I'd like any comments. I'd like this to be a dialogue, if that's possible, about any of the ideas I've brought forward. Any comments?
I've got one. I'm always so appreciative, Kim, of your ability to kind of go where so few people will tread, to really sink in and immerse into the possible realities of the people who are actually there, trying to get out of the Western mind. And so I'm always just fascinated how you're putting this together, both, scientist in you with the evidence, but then going way beyond at least Western science to just connect with what might actually be going on, or at least, the reality to different people. And how can we judge one reality against each other? Other societies have lived thousands of years, longer than this little short culture we're in right now have lived. So it's really hard to put any of them down saying their ideas didn't work, So yeah, I'm just loving what I hear, and just wanted to say thanks for taking the time to lay that out. You kind of have a gift, your ability to do that.
Well, thanks very much. One of my thoughts is getting into physics. We have the idea of complementarity in quantum mechanics. How particles are both waves and particles, and one has to appreciate the duality of that in physics. And the same thing is true with the world that we explore as cultural astronomers. And we know what a rock is, and we know what the sun is. But what was going on in the minds of people 1,000 years ago may have been completely different. So I think we as explorers need to sort of balance the two of them, both waves and particles, both sacred and then actual rock. Anyhow, thanks for your comments, Ivy.
I might have a point to throw in, Kim. I liked your analysis, of the ontological approach, which I would credit you with as much as I would Ruth. And Pockett's bundling theory, I think, is a powerful tool, even though I probably don't subscribe to all of the ideas that he put forward. But I think it's a great tool. And maybe it's because I just discovered them at the same time, but I would probably throw Hayden in there as well. Brian Hayden's work with secret societies. I think those two, in conjunction, Pocketot and Hayden really, maybe it was because I discovered them at the same time, but it really, through my way of thinking, certainly jolted it. I think maybe it's my own experience, but I think they're pretty complementary. And
yeah, I think so. For the idea of sacred societies, it really fits in with the idea of Chaco being an empty ceremonial center. Namely, the great houses were occupied by and run by secret societies rather than in any kind of large egalitarian democracy of the modern pueblos. And I was thinking about what happened with Pueblo Bonito, which, as you know, started out tilted with regard to north-south, and then at around 1090 was converted into a large structure that was north-south. And the only way I think a structure like that could be so modified would be by the kind of power structure that Hayden describes in secret societies. So they're related.
How can I get myself on there? On here. Hello, Kim.
Hi,
There we are. Okay, yeah. Yeah.
good to see you.
You also.
Where are you now, by the way?
Older.
Boulder, I think I've heard of that place.
Yes, I think you have. No, I've been familiar with what you've been saying, of course. My feeling about Chaco is any explanation will be too simplistic. It's really important to remember that when the buildings first started, I'm not sure we would call them great houses, and for a pretty long period of time, they were something else. And they may have been more domiciles, they may have been more people living there. But what it brings up for me is that I think so many different people were involved in Chaco, and had you been there 1,000 years ago, you could have found many different stories about what its purpose was, depending on who you talk to. It was a complex place, and it also changed over time, and that's important to remember too. So any definition of Chaco always leaves me in the sense of, well, okay, that might explain a certain group of people, it might explain a certain period of time. But Chaco is always much more complex than all that. That's not to throw any sand in what you're doing, of course, because I believe strongly in what you're doing. And the idea that astronomy played an important part, if nothing else, is I think an incredibly important insight in this period of time. And archaeologists are even starting to believe it now. So I love every endeavor that happens in this arena. I just see Chaco as so far beyond our ability to really comprehend what it was for those so many different people. Anyway, just thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the ideas of bundling is that there was astronomy going on in Chaco after the movement of the powerful Great House people away from Chaco, namely astronomy was going on after 1130 or 1140. And it was, driven partly, I think, could be by Fajada Butte as being the very, very dramatic and sacred structure, and what was happening in terms of the sun rising up over Fajada Butte. But there's evidence, as you well know, from these grinding slicks and peck basins that probably occurred after 1120 or 1130, that astronomy and ceremony was taking place in Chaco long after the great houses stopped functioning as ceremonial centers.
Just one quick rejoinder. I think it was also going on long before there were the things that eventually got called great houses also.
Well, we have pit houses at Chibikase, which looked like they were oriented astronomically. Any other comments? I was hoping we could get, I really didn't want to show my slides. I didn't have time to show all the slides, but I'd like to have a dialogue with any of you.
No more comments? Let's see. Well, a quick question, jumping back to Gordon, or a comment, I guess. You mentioned difficulty going out to sites at particular times, and I think that's something that we've been working a lot towards with photogrammetry and making models. And I think there was some interesting talks at the Oxford conference about, placing the models in like programs like Solaritarium to do these alignments and documentation without having to go out to the site on those particular dates. So I think that's something to think about too, as the technology increases, we don't have to necessarily be at a site at any given time, and we can document them much more thoroughly now digitally.
Well, that's for the horizon astronomy though, right? I mean, you still, you're not going to be able to capture the interaction on the glyph itself. But yeah, you're right. I mean, all these ability to set a point and determine what the view shield is from that point along the horizon. I think you can model the horizon astronomy sitting at your desk now, practically.
Yeah, well, not just the horizon. You can actually build 3D models of the entire rock face, and if you get the shadow casting, you can start to do that. I think we're getting to that point where.
You think so? Okay.
Well, I've done it a little bit, but I think it's going to become much more mature.
Okay. Well, yeah, that would be interesting to see that happen. Certainly.
And it also has the other advantage of preservation. As these sites get eroded or destroyed,
Right.
you have this digital twin, then we can carry on the research. So
I hope that doesn't completely eliminate the working archaeoastronomer. It's very important to be out at these places in terms of horizon astronomy at sunrise, because one is looking at the experience of the observer. It'd be too bad to have it so mechanized and abstract that you never needed to go out there yourself.
No, nothing will replace going out there.
Yeah, I think it remains a great, powerful tool, but I don't think it could ever replace ground truthing.
Oh no, you have to definitely go out and verify, but it is a powerful tool. It lets you explore. It basically gives you the freedom of time. You can, once you have the model, you can look at all different time points in the comfort of your own home, but you have to go back out there to verify.
Right.
That's just too easy, my estimation.
I've got a question for Kim, if you guys can hear me.
Yes.
I'll just forget it.
Hey,
Yeah, Kim, I think it's the first time we've spoken. I sure like the way you think, and I like reading your papers too.
I just tried to lower my hand.
Thank you.
I can't. Oh, I have no idea.
No, not hearing me.
Did you have a question, Alan? Or
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Did you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can. Mhm.
Okay, I'll carry on. I was just thinking that about the seasonal use of Chaco as a ceremonial, trading site, whatever, combined use. There were many other indigenous sites across North America. By the way, I've got a background in archaeology, so studied this a little bit. And these particular sites, the ones that weren't inhabited full time, have a particular archaeological signature. You know, the kinds of foods that were eaten, the kind of things that were left, kind of like Durrington Walls in England, if you're familiar with that site, where the pig bones gave it away as happening at the winter festival at the solstice. Is there archaeological evidence like that at Chaco for seasonal use?
No, not really. I don't think, but GB could help me out on this. But in terms of large numbers of people walking into the canyon for a festival, that's hard. It's impossible in summer for two reasons. One is that you need to be tending your fields, or if you're agriculturalist, and the San Juan River, if you're coming down from the north, was very, very difficult to cross to reach Chaco Canyon. Whereas in at December, the hunting is over, the fields are fallow, the streams are low, so it's very easy to get in, and it's the time when you're free to make that kind of trip rather than during the summer or during the period of farming and hunting. So that's my impression of the of reason for choosing one season over the other.
Makes sense.
Some of the other evidence has to do with the trash mounds. All of this needs to be done again because some of these are old studies, but they would find trash mounds at the great houses showing very little refuse being thrown out onto them. Or they would see a lens of where it would be put out all during a short period of time, and then another lens of where just stuff had blown in. On the other hand, on the other side of the canyon, where most of the small house sites, those trash mounds tend to show a gradual, continual buildup of material, looking like the people were living there year round. So there's some of that from some of the 1970s and 80s archaeology.
Yeah, that's lovely. The intermittent occupation from the trash mounds, like at Pueblo Alto.
Yeah, bingo. I went to Chaco with an archaeologist, and she mentioned those same things that you just mentioned there, the seasonality of the middens. And I just wondered if any real definitive work had been done to nail it down, any time period to support your hypothesis, which I like.
Well, Walkie Toll was the one who really worked at the trash mounds at Alto. That was 30 years ago or something like that. It'd be nice to have it more carefully analyzed with regard to time.
Thank you.
I'd like to speak to the modeling issue. We've done a lot of photogrammetry and horizon photography at a particular site in Chaco, and the fellow I'm working with from Clark Planetarium, he said, oh, it's absolutely sure we can get the completely accurate astronomical model. It will correlate the horizon to the shadow interaction on the rock art, and it will, it's gonna, this is a really, really challenging thing to do. And we have a lot of ground truth data, but we can't get the model to actually line up, right? If you line it up with just one or two or 3 points of observation, and then you go out and ground truth some more, and they just found a major bug in the program. We don't know if that's going to help it all, correct. But to get real astronomical accuracy out of depending on the topography and the surround is not trivial, and in spite of a lot of ground truth observation as well, just to get it to line up. So I agree with you. I think that it's pretty exciting you can get hypotheses out of it, right, by exploring it. But as everyone is saying, I think it's important to go and see for yourself if it's a significant thing that you want to make a claim about. The other thing I'd like to offer in keeping more with the purposes and uses of Chaco in the indigenous circles that we've been running on this project. There's a suggestion of, for some of the ancestral Puebloan people, you know, that Chaco was like a university. It was a place that people went to learn things. Like you would come and you would use particular site or learn how to do sun watching or create different types of objects and then take it back. So there would be people coming, visiting priests, and people would do pilgrimages in to support those people who were staying there for a longer time and then go back. So there's some, we kind of are grooving and know that it was GB made the point, it's not the only interpretation, right? But this idea that people would come in to treat it as a learning place and go home and then do that type of sun watching, which continues to this day, of course, in Pueblans in the Southwest.
And that's a lovely thought, that great houses were colleges or universities. We certainly have examples of that around the world, especially in India, where pilgrimages and ceremonies and universities were all combined. And it's conceivable that there are enough great houses in Chaco that some of them may have been primarily colleges and others were used for other things.
In that regard, as far as solar markers go, I've always felt like the solar markers are a portable technology that in that
Yes.
university setting, they can learn if one site has solar markers and they're taught how to look for that and how to read the horizon, they can take it back to their location and apply them. And I think that's why there's so many out there. I mean, over the years, I've heard from people in France and Spain who have some very small sites that have some winter solstice interaction. And I just think that, you know, rock art is ubiquitous around the world. It's just that somebody in these locations really need to concentrate and go look for these things. I think we'll find there's a lot more solar markers worldwide.
Yeah, that's consistent. Gordon, that's consistent with what he was saying. Is like, so we go back to our place and we find our own way to do a similar thing, right? And yeah, and so there's that kind of propagation of the idea and the technology to make it work, whether it's a horizon or light on, you know, rock art or whatever.
One thing, Fountain.
We had it at Yellow Jacket, as you perhaps know, good part of the larger site was owned by the Wilson family, who had sort of a love-hate relationship with archaeologists. But Mr. Wilson had a solar marker in his dining room in the house that he religiously maintained and paid attention to.
You guys have me all psyched up to get out tomorrow and go to a couple places, check it out at dawn and sunset.
Yeah, who's gonna go see the sunrise tomorrow?
I think it's going to be about 15 or 20 below here in Montana.
Well, I was going to, there's a stone circle on the Fort Hood property that I've been to on a number of occasions. And I've been there on the winter solstice for the sunrise, and it's a very dramatic scene, but I don't think that I've got the particular point of observation. But the government archaeologists don't really want me to pursue it that much. I think they want to keep that. They just want to keep that whole thing low key, even though the Cherokee National Burial Ground is actually on the property there, and they do. I'm sure that there are multiple tribes that'll be there tonight, tomorrow for that event. They do a lot of sweat lodge stuff. So, and I've been invited to do that at times, but I just haven't had the chance to do it. So.
Does anybody else have any more questions? for Kim or Gordon? Well, I just wanted to say this, the Journal Club has been amazingly successful, and I think we're just getting to know each other, first of all, but also just sharing of ideas, which has been amazing. So we owe a huge thank you for Chris for putting this on. Without Chris Laser, we wouldn't have been able to do this, and without you guys. So what I really want to encourage everybody is in the following year to think about, presenting your own work, or Chris has curated a list of papers that would be useful. So if anybody is interested, please contact me or Chris. And thank you, Chris, for really putting all this on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's been enjoyable. And, nights like tonight is really the great payoff.
So
Thank you
you
guys.
all.
for putting up-
It's pretty,
Thank
it's
you all so much.
Everybody.
And happy holiday.
Happy holidays, happy solstice.
happy
Happy
holidays.
Yep, bye.
Bye.